Okay. So we're just waiting at least on one person to join the live right now. No one is in attendance. But we'll just give them like 2 minutes to join, and then I can start with the questions. How does that sound?
Yeah, no problem.
Thank you. I mean, at the end of the day, people can watch on the replay, so I'm sure more people will be checking in after we chat. So
How have you been doing?
good. I'm not sure if I think I told you that I was in Orlando last week, so I was just checking out the carnival celebrations for the first time. So it was good.
Okay.
It was a small carnival. Lots of vibes. I mean, the people who went there were very happy to be there. Okay, hold on. Alexa, stop listening. Sorry about that. Okay, so we do have one person on the live, so we can get started. So my name is Tasha. For those of you who don't know, I run this channel. I'm living my life, and I tend to promote culture within the Caribbean, of the Caribbean and the Caribbean diaspora. So last month is exactly a month since Point Fortin had their Borough Day celebrations, and I just wanted to chat with Mr. Bertrand. He's a former mayor of Point Fortin, just to get his some insights on as to why Point Fortin started, what was his vision behind it, and so forth. So before I get too deep in the weeds, Mr. Bertrand, would you mind introducing yourself briefly for the folks on the line?
Well, I'm Francis Bertrand. As indicated, I'm the former mayor of Point Fortin. In fact, I have been the longest serving mayor, and I have been a member of council for probably about 20 years. I have been a former councillor for Tiche, for Guapo, and I've been an alderman, both a councillor and an alderman. I was also the past president of the World Conference of Mayors. That is an international mayor's body. And I'm still presently serving as the vice president for the Caribbean Affairs at the World Conference of Mayors. I'm a community and cultural activist, and I'm glad to share my story and to share Point Fortin's story, and hope it could inspire those of you who would have been listening to come to Point Fortin and visit us for our Borough celebration next year.
Yes, and thank you so much for taking the time to chat with us. I did have a question. So you said that you have been the longest serving mayor, but what years did you serve exactly?
Okay, I became a member of council probably around 1988. I was the deputy mayor then. I was the person responsible for culture. And I served on the council from 1988 to I think 2006.
Wow.
And out of that, about 10 years, I was the mayor. I served for 3 terms as the mayor, then I guess became statute bar. But I'm still active in the community, and I still try and spread the word of cultural tourism in other areas, in my other capacity as through the World Conference of Mayors.
Okay, thank you. That is pretty impressive. That's a pretty impressive resume. So I know I did chat with you briefly while I was in Point Fortin, and you mentioned that this concept of Point Fortin Borough Day was under your administration. I mean, like you thought of this and you put it into play. Could you give us or enlighten us on what was your vision for starting Borough Day? Yeah.
Well, I must say I would consider myself one of the pioneers, because while I did take the idea of establishing a cultural festival to the council, when it started initially, the mayor at the time was Mr. Achong. I was the deputy mayor and responsible for culture. So I brought the concept of the borough celebration to him as a project. So he consented, and we were able to then mobilize the community, village council, the business people. And I think interestingly, the celebration, while a lot of emphasis is now placed on this the festivities and fetes and the parties in the community, that came about as a matter of cultural, as a matter of economic necessity. Because when we got onto council in 1987, around there, the council was being starved for funds. At that time, the NAI would have taken control of the government. We were a P&M council. We were getting very little money, and the community was coming to us for all kind of assistance. So then I felt, look, if we don't have money from the government to assist the people, let us use some of the natural resources of Point Fortin. We were a sporting community, we were a cultural community. So the idea came to use some of those talents to see if it can enhance the economic well-being of the community. I also visited at the time. Superior Fete was a big thing, but when I went to Superior Fete, I saw the DJs on the streets, and there were steel band which were packed up at the side, you know. So I said, look, we need to get steel band involved. I spoke to one of my managers at Trintok at the time, Mr. Abdullah, and got him to agree to get the company involved to kind of provide assistance to see if we can get some of the bigger bands from Port of Spain to come to Point. You know, in those days, coming to Point Fortin for steel band it never happened before. The bands from Port of Spain stayed in Port of Spain. The Panorama final, everything was in Port of Spain. And you would then have to leave Point to hear some of the top bands play. So he decided to assist. Well, he originally wanted just to bring the top bands to Point alone. I said, no, we can't do that. We have to have Point Fortin and South bands involved. And we cannot compromise. And that is how the idea of getting the bands to Point Fortin came. But I must also add that it was not an easy struggle, because for the first year, when we started this concept, people were saying, well, Tombane come in Point, and that kind of thing. In fact, even the Point bands themselves were reluctant. So when we started, we had 4 bands. I think the bands were Fonclair, Solo Harmonites, Despas, and I think maybe Starlef. Those are the 4 bands that initially gave us support for borough. In fact, in our local parlance, the first borough we had a bus. We have 4 bands, we have people, and I had no band for them, you know. So people started to grumble. We stayed with it. And then the next year, we got a little more traction. And another thing, during those periods from, let's say, 86 to 89, it was also important to do a festival to try and encourage steel band in South, because the South bands were dying. They weren't even making the finals. We had like 1 band in the national final. So steel band in South itself was going through a phase. And one of the things we wanted to do is to try, and if we can promote an event in South, at least we'd get some of the South bands to be active a little more, because there was no place for them to perform, because they weren't good enough to make it to the Savannah. So, and by the 3rd year, the idea kicked up. We had about 17 bands. And after the 4th year, we now had to screen the bands, because everybody wants to come to Point Fortin. But the idea is a novel idea. It was different. And then one of the things I had insisted, because Tobago, then I was saying, well, you know, if we have this festival, we have to bring the winning bands from town. And, you know, they must be I say, well, no, you can bring them. But the borough set up the Pananimo. We want bands from East, West, North, South, and Tobago. So we insisted that we have at least 3 bands from each one of these zones, and then we had a limit. We couldn't go beyond 25 bands. It would have been a little cumbersome, but we insisted to get bands from each zone and also from Tobago. Because most people don't understand that steel band is a community thing. And once, whether a band is a champion band or not, once a band comes from a community, the people from that community tend to follow the band. So that kind of marketing concept we utilize. And that's why we got so much traction. Another thing too that the celebration, white pan on the move was the main attraction then. The celebration was not just about steel pan, it was about a lot of community. We had events within the electoral districts. We promoted sport. We had sporting competitions. We had competitions among the schools, essay writing competitions. We had several cultural events in terms of traditional African dances, what have you, because Point Fortin also was the place which started emancipation celebrations. A lot of people may not realize that, but the emancipation celebration was first celebrated on the streets in Point Fortin. Lancelot Lane, John Cupid, we were the only community then to celebrate emancipation by getting the school children and community groups on the streets, and we had a major parade. And it is by the efforts of the pioneers from Point Fortin that those emancipation celebrations, after we paraded in Point, we would go and encourage Port of Spain groups, go to the east and other areas of the country to encourage them. I mean, and over time, it grew, and like everything else, the capital city attracted, they had all the resources. So the celebrations started to grow in Port of Spain. But emancipation, even before it became a holiday, started off in Point Fortin. Lancelot Lane, John Cupid, and the Trinidad Cultural Workshop, they were the groups that really started it. We used to go into the schools during the August holidays and train the students, educate them about the different themes. So that way we kept the spirit of the emancipation alive. So, I mean, I digressed a bit just to show that community connection with culture. But what made Point Fortin celebration unique and gave it an international flavor is really during the period when I became the vice president or president of the World Conference of Mayors. Now, this is an international group of mayors and former mayors, and we have conferences all over the world. When I became the president of that, and I was able to use that organization to really go and market Point Fortin. Everywhere we had a conference, I would talk about Point Fortin. I would invite mayors to come to Point Fortin, whether it's Africa, whether it's Canada, whether it's South America, also all over the world. I kept spreading the gospel of Point Fortin and culture. And then in those days, what used to happen through my connection with the world mayors, every year for Borough celebration, we used to have a contingent of foreign mayors. So we used to have mayors coming from America, Canada, from Africa to experience Point Fortin. And of course, as a mayor, when you come and understand what we're doing, they would go back to their respective communities and talk about it and encourage persons to come. So we built the marketing aspect of Borough from the ground up. And of course, the diaspora from Point Fortin. It was a time to come home. And we tend to stick to the communal aspect because it's a difference between coming home for Borough Day and coming home for Carnival. The NCC at the time was trying to say, well, this is another Carnival. And I resisted that poster. I said, this is not a Carnival. This is a community festival with elements of Carnival involved. It makes a difference. Because what happens, while we would see like the Juve and the pan on the street, which is at the climax, prior to that, we have a lot of community events. The churches do things to raise funds. Most of the community groups do things to raise funds. Persons would have visitors into their homes. The family come from abroad, and people would go house to house like Christmas and Parang and visit. And so all this sort of alignment takes place behind the scene. So that also some persons prefer to come back home to Point Fortin for that, because you can meet friends and family, as opposed to if you come for carnival, everybody just going down and see mass person. So Point, that Borough celebration gave you that communal spirit. And a matter of fact, my good friend Super Blue, and he was very instrumental, because in the early past, once we having anything cultural at Point, he would attend and say, boy, this is a community festival, a reunion of the people. And he would keep that theme and sang a couple songs on Point Fortin Borough. And then, of course, we also boasted as being the cultural capital of Trinidad. So we produced a lot of the top Calypsonians, a lot of the top sportsmen too, and a lot of the top, some of the good pan men. And we had some of the top pan tuners. We had like Alan Gervais, we had Boots, we had quite a few Bumpy. We had a lot of pan tuners came from Point Fortin. And I mean, in terms of Calypso and Soca, well, the list is long. The Super Blue, the Ivor George, the Western Rollins, the Luther, the Naya George, General Grant is also from Point Fortin.
Interesting.
Mighty Duke, the 4-time Calypso monarch, he's born and bred in Point Fortin. And all these guys are proud of their Point Fortin root, and they would take this time to come back and share with friends and family. So we are a special community in Point. And one of the things that kept us together also is the fact that Point Fortin is a migrant community made up of a lot of island people. Because in the early days of the oil field persons, that time Point is really bush. There was no roads to Point Fortin. They used to come to Point Fortin by the steamer on the coastline. And persons, to get people to work in the oil field in the early days, you couldn't get many Trinidadians. So you had people coming from Grenada, St. Vincent, all the islands, to come to Point Fortin for better opportunity. And when they did that, of course, I am a second or third generation Grenadian. They started to establish their family, they sent for their relatives from the islands, so that we built a very unique type of community in Point. So Point people, we special, we're very clannish, we're very, very religious in a lot of ways. And so it's all these little things that make us into the kind of community we are. And these ingredients help to make the Borough celebration what it is. There's not just a show of pan on the streets and whatever. There's a lot of other things that makes it attract in a particular way.
Okay. So I was able to attend one of the events in Point. It was Blossom and Blue Food, and it was on North Tobago. And I do remember you saying, Tobagonians have, Point Fortin has the most amount of Tobagonians outside of Tobago. Were they part of that movement?
Yeah, we have a fairly large Tobago population in and around Point Fortin. A matter of fact, in the prior years, we had a night which was dedicated to Tobago. We used to call it the Tobago Night, where the Tobago would bring their artists from Tobago and have a parade, the Tobago wedding and all those things. That was part of the celebration. I mean, I would discuss with the new mayor to ensure that we put back some of those elements into Borough. Because we had a night that was to display Tobago culture. Because we were a very accommodating kind of community. So this year we still maintain, we had 2 Tobago bands. And we had a very unique piece of history where the steel band was concerned. Because some of our local historians in Point Fortin, they have laid claim to the fact that the steel band was in fact invented in Point Fortin. In that one of the pioneers of the steel band, for instance, Simon, who we hear so much about, he in fact used to live in Point. He came from Point Fortin, and he would have gone to Port of Spain maybe at an early age. But prior to that, himself and Bumpy Neverson and a couple of those guys started to do work and develop the steel band from the discarded oil drum, because in 1930s, the only place you can have gotten oil drums is in Point. And in Port of Spain at the time, they were experimenting with biscuit tins maybe. But Point Fortin was the place where the actual drums. So we have those records that day. So some of the initial pan was developed from Point Fortin, and that was shared. That was shared. So Point has their place in history in terms of being a major contribution to the evolution of pan. I mean, that is a subject we would have a lot of debates on, but we have information, we have facts. And from 1931, there's no part in recorded history. I will give you the history of pan before 1933. From 1931, we have records where pan was in Point Fortin, and the first place where pan were played in a party per se was at Perseverance Hall. As a hall we used to have in Point Fortin at one time. So the history of pan is tied into Point Fortin. And as they say, pan is part of our DNA. So that's why we use that as the basis to push the borough celebrations. Of course, right now, celebrations has grown. And in fact, the juvenile, which attracts more the younger people, that's the crowd are there sometimes just as big or even bigger than pan, And one thing I want to mention, we always maintain a particular order in Point. But if you notice, you see some of the traditional devils, but the juve is kind of a pretty juve in the sense that we don't have mud mass in Point. But the juve, we ban that, Our juve celebrations, you cannot come there with anything like mud. You have to come with paint and powder and that kind of thing. So we don't have that. If you notice, you don't see that in our celebration. So again, there's a lot of things people take for granted, but they don't understand. So there's a method in the madness, and we try to maintain a certain particular standard. Hopefully, some of this information would be shared with in the current generation of councillors and what have you. So they would try to preserve some of the traditions that make Point Fortin celebrations so special.
Thank you for that history. So when did Juve and that gap in, I would say the period of bands, but I'm not sure what that gap in between the day, what is actually called. When did that come about?
Well, when we started the pan and the move, I think the Juve came probably maybe about 8 years after, because we used to have on the Friday night, we used to have some of the pan around the necks. There used to be a parade on the streets Friday night. And then people would just lime, and some of that would overlap into the Saturday morning. So like 4 o'clock in the morning, you'll have like some of the traditional pan around the neck on the streets. And then the DJs and stuff, we wanted to give them a space also. So then later on, one of the local groups started to lobby, and we gave them the opportunity to include the Juve celebration. But the Juve is run by a local group, I think of the Bay Sports Club. They run it. I mean, the borough facilitated the infrastructure and what have you. But they actually manage that part of it. And then that now started to attract a lot of the younger crowds, because they into the Juve and different music and stuff. So it gave it a good balance. You had the Juve in the morning, and then you had the pan in the evening. What we also found was that there was a gap in between. So for like someone coming as a tourist after the Juve, people would go home and probably rest, the younger ones. But then between 12 o'clock and 5 o'clock, nothing happens. So then what we did, we included, well, there was a TASA competition usually that would take place during that space. And then we liaised with NCC to get, so you can now get your traditional mask costume being displayed. And then you had some of the children's bands. And then also you have some of your, what you call your pretty masks. So between 12 o'clock and 5 o'clock, you have a display of masks on the street. Some of the few bands from Port of Spain would bring down their mask costumes and display. We have the traditional characters, they also would take the stage. And then we also had a parade which included some a tasarama, all of that. So all those things happen during the space between 12 o'clock and 5, 6 o'clock when the pan and the move. Then during that time also we have some elements of stick fighting and some other traditional things. Now those aspects of the celebration are not as widely publicized as they should be. But a lot of people don't know that these things happen in between. They come for Jubilee, probably go and rest, and they come back in the evening to the park. But there's a lot of activities in the middle. Certainly during our time, during my time, we used to highlight that. So I guess the new committee now they'll have to kind of promote that a little more to make it a holistic type of celebration. And then traditionally, what we had after the pan and the move, the Sunday, we'll go to Clifton Hill Beach and have what we call a sea-a-thon, right, where you have boat races, kayak races, swimming races, what have you. Now, that aspect of it didn't happen this year, but again, it's something that the powers that be probably can look at. So the borough celebration used a climax on Clifton Hill Beach, where we had a lot of sea sports taking place on this Sunday. So it was a very comprehensive package, give you a chance to cool down, But all in all, it gives you some of the elements of carnival without the hassle. It's more relaxed, more slow paced, and you could cook, you could lime, So it's a more fulfilling experience than the traditional carnival where you just stand at the side of the road maybe or so we tend to keep those aspects alive. And that's why it is so attractive to so many people. So a number of people now forego, instead of coming home for carnival, they come for borough celebration because it's a more fulfilling experience. And the celebration is not just the pan, the juve, it runs for like about a month because, as I said before, in the weeks prior, we have a build-up of activities in the community. We have cricket, we have football, we have basketball, and then each community have their cultural event, what we call the community spotlight, so that every community get a chance to showcase whatever talent and skills they have. And most importantly, get a chance for their local vendors and business people to make some money. So making money for the people is always at the behind, or should always be behind all that we do, because it's very important. During the 3 months surrounding the borough celebration, those are the 3 most economically vibrant months in Point Fortin. And the business community will tell you that's when the most money is circulated. That is bigger than Christmas, Carnival, and what have you. So that period is when the most money is circulated in Point Fortin. I mean, one of the areas that we do lack in now is in terms of accommodation. And while the bed and breakfast has been improving, persons are now converting and setting up facilities primarily to accommodate persons. But that is always a challenge. And now, given the advent of the Point Fortin Highway, I guess when the highway itself is completed next year, it's now easier to get to Point. And that impacted on the number of people that came this year. The turnout this year was very good. It was better than last year when we coming out of COVID. So hope, and certainly by next year, because of the highway, we'll have even more persons coming down. So then now we have to adjust your logistics to suit, to make sure that we can accommodate.
Yeah, I think
So,
it's definitely more accessible. Sorry to interrupt.
yeah,
In
go
terms of
ahead.
the highway, because my friend dropped me and picked me up, and they came from St. James, and they said it took like an hour and 2 minutes during the day to get to Point Fortin. So I remember when I was young, it took hours. Like even
Yeah,
from San Fernando, it took a
yeah.
very long time to get to Point. So I think the accessibility is definitely impacting numbers. And I'm just curious about what you think about in terms of like your readiness, in terms of Point Fortin's readiness to deal with these numbers. Because I found this year, like, a lot of parties, it seemed that overwhelming in terms like you had like a lot of crowding as well as like problems with parking and that kind of thing. So is there anything that promoters of events or even, Borough the council itself, if that's such a thing, could take from this experience and try to implement? What can they implement to alleviate some of those issues we saw this year with crowding?
You're quite correct. I mean, I'm no longer in charge of the committee per se, but I think presently I certainly would need to speak with the mayor, and there's a need to certainly maintain uh, anniversary celebrations committee throughout the year. But it's no longer you can just put this thing in place to run Borough Day, because we have to maintain a full-time committee, probably paid people and stuff, to look at some of the things that you mentioned there, because clearly the logistics has to be improved. And like everything else, if you have a product and you're not moving with the times and you're not improving it, after a while, you're running into challenges and people will find out alternatives. So we have to continually improve the product that we have. And certainly accommodation is one thing, and other type of infrastructure, like as you say, parking and what have you. Now, in the earlier days too, we had the level of organization probably was a little better because we had specific persons responsible for some of these things. For parking in particular, we would have designated parking zones like and then by the Egypt School, Point Fortin College, even Coronation Park, and we would do shuttles to come into Point Fortin.
Mm-hmm.
I think that didn't happen this year. But those are the little things that needs to be done to maintain a certain kind of order. So people can park at some of these areas, and then you get a little shuttle for 5 minutes to drop you in and bring you back out. But everybody really can't fit into this space. So those are some of the things that need to be put back into the planning committee. And so we could ensure our visitors are comfortable and your car is secured and you can operate in a good space. And I think one of the good things, particularly this year, is that the celebration based on the support we would have gotten from the army, police, the celebrations were incident free. There was no, crime is a critical thing now everywhere. You have to be careful. But the authorities did what they had to do to ensure that celebrations were very orderly. And in fact, in the past, I used to, well, as the mayor, I always took responsibility for security. I would be liaising with the commissioner of police, and the police commissioner would say, Point is one area that they don't have problems to get people to work. They say once it's Point, everybody volunteer and they want to come to Point for the policemen who have friends and family, what have you. And then after the celebration, as the mayor, I used to host the security people. The next day, I used to keep a special luncheon for them, thank them, give them a little lunch, have them drive 2 points in a parade, let the people acknowledge and thank them. And that used to go a long way to Mr. Allard and some of these guys. The guys really used to appreciate that. And he says, because of those little things, everybody would volunteer, want to come to Point Fortin. So I think we want to thank the security forces for assisting us again this year and maintain the level of security in the celebration.
Yeah, I definitely had a good time. I did not know about the weeks prior. If I had known, I would have come to, do more coverage. It's definitely something on my radar for next year or next time. Um, in terms of like getting the word out there, okay, these elements of Point Fortin Borough do exist because I know I've heard people refer to Point Borough Day as, a second carnival in Trinidad, and
Mhm.
it seems as though you're trying to say, yeah, there are elements of carnival, but it's more like it more focuses on the cultural aspects within the community, right? How could we get that message out there? Hey, there are other
Well,
things to partake in, and it's not
well,
only
well,
for point people, so
well, I guess getting the message out there is talking to people like yourself, you know. And when we only started already, we didn't have all this YouTube and internet and things, so it was a lot of word of mouth and traditional advertising. I mean, through my organization, I'm still involved with the World Mayors, and I would still, in fact, I have a big conference in Atlanta shortly where we have about 3,000 people, mayors from all over. So we still use those kind of medium to get information. But I think the committee now has to look at the marketing of the celebration, particularly in terms of the digitizing a lot of what we have. And they have to know what to market. They need to market, okay, they have the jubilee, have the pan and the move, that kind of thing. But they need to market the holistic aspect of it. Because very many people don't be talking about that, because people don't realize that each community have a festival in itself before Borough Day. Each community have a little celebration. They don't realize that the schools, we have activities for the school children where they will participate, where there's essay writing competition, educational aspect of Point Fortin, the sporting aspect of it, the football, the cricket, the basketball, because this generation that is coming behind, they have to also understand that Point Fortin is a special place. It is a unique place, and that is what we have to hold on to make us different from the rest. And I think those kind of values has helped us knock on wood to at least be able to maintain some kind of balance in terms of the young people and the criminality and crime. We are not um, immune from that because we do have problems in that regard also. Certainly not the scale of let's say, a Port of Spain per se, but we have those in authority now have to understand that these little issues, these things about culture, and even the government has to focus on education, sport, and culture. Those are some of your best crime fighting tools that you can use now. Get into the communities, because people could gonna living around that too, Get into the communities, build on these things, turn it into an economic platform, so the community can benefit, and that will help a lot in terms of trying to maintain some peace and harmony within your community. But there is need now for the marketing to go at another level, and because now we're talking about your global village, we have different ways of meeting, reaching those audiences. And we have the YouTube, the Instagram, the Facebook, the whatever. So we have to think about really doing a kind of package and getting access to those kind of media, and even get persons with the skill and as a specialty to drive it outside. I think if you don't do that, you will tend to get still, but the information has to be out there. Because just as you say, some of the elements I would have spoken about, you may not have been aware. A lot of people may not have been aware. When they hear Point Fortin, they'll hear pan and they hear Tuve and they hear, because some people come to Point Fortin Borough celebration and they don't even engage in the pan and whatever. They come and they network with their friends and their family and they spend time, make it a family time, visit your family, visit your, you know, that kind of thing. and they don't get into the hectic fetting part of the thing, you know. Some come and they just go to all the fets. And then by the time for the pan and thing, they're tired, they're sleeping. But there's a lot of other activities that are. So everybody, there's something for everybody, and we have to keep it that way. You know, the seniors, you make sure you have a little event in there for them also. And then some of the schools, they use it to raise money, whether it's a little cookout or what fundraising event. So most of the local institutions use this period to have some of the major fundraisers at that point, you know.
Yes. So one of
So
our
that's it.
viewers, sorry, Sati, she said she was there when Point Fortin became a borough and she's seen it grown over the years. So recently, it was news to me that Siparia became a borough because I started seeing stuff popping up about Siparia Borough Day, and I was a bit confused because I thought it was okay. Isn't it like Siparia Fete? And I reached out to my cousin because I have family. I'm from South, so my family from Siparia. I was like, wait, Siparia became a borough, and they were like, yeah, this year will be the first year. Well, the first year since it became a borough. So, any advice you would have to like other boroughs there, seeing how much Borough Day has grown, and in terms of you know creating, making it like an economic drive in terms of culture and so forth. Any advice you would give to upcoming boroughs?
Well,
In terms, yeah.
they can engage my services as a community relations consultant, you know. They work it. But I have been a lot of some of the mayors and them have reached out to me, and I've been, you know, doing some work quietly. You know, the mayor of San Fernando, he wants to try and project San Fernando in a similar light, and I will work with him quietly. So I hopefully between this year and next year, you will see a difference in San Fernando. Because you see, the thing you need to understand is it's not just about holding a series of events, you know. You can do that, promote it like a fed this year, that. But you have to spend some time to get the people involved. And when I say involved, they must feel pride in this particular event. They must see this as showcasing the community in a positive way. They must see it as an opportunity to make money for themselves or their family. But it takes a lot of work, but you have to go and you have to be talking to the people. You have to and get them engaged. And once they get involved, the community itself, then the other aspects would just flow. But the community awareness is very important. As a matter of fact, before we close, let me give you a little joke because at one time one of the mayors of Port of Spain, Mayor Sargent, God bless his soul, he's deceased now, Mayor. He said, boy, you know, because everybody, you know, as mayors, we always try to outdo each other. And you know, and there was this thing about North South, because everything big was happening in town. But point this little backward, please come and set up this celebration, and everybody leaving town to come point. So he tell me one time, he said, you know, that thing you have at Point there, I will take that, you know, because we have all the bands in town. But remember, and it's true, because most of the big bands are in Port of Spain. So I told him, I said, well, you can take the bands in Port of Spain, but you can't take Borody out of Point Fortin. I said, Borody is more than the bands, you know. I told him, I said, Point Fortin, I said, Port of Spain, not a community, you know. And he laughed. I said, you know, I said, nobody don't live in town. When them stores close, everybody go over there, they go Point Fortin, Spain, deserted. And then at one time, there really was an attempt because he got the bands and they tried to do a similar thing in Port of Spain around the savannah. So he tried it about 1 year, 2 year, but it never really got off the ground because while you had the steel bands to parade, the people wasn't part of it, you know. So that is an important part. And in fact, there's a little model I have developed in terms of this kind of activity. Because through the real world, as we travel, we do a lot of work in different communities. And even the US, at one time, many years ago, they used to have a big carnival in Long Island, which was stopped. And I went to the mayor there, and try to show him how we could re-engage the people. And the week after Labor Day, that Long Island Carnival kicked off. And then, well, I don't know if it may have died now. And at one time, the carnival in Boston had died down. And myself, I went to there, speak with the mayor and stuff. And I remember myself, Choctus was there also. And I went and worked with the community there to try and show them how we could build back the carnival. And now Boston Carnival is back up and running. And one of the challenges with the carnivals in North America is a lot of them has grown now and is really established, like Miami and what have you. But the important aspect of all of them is really getting the community, the diaspora, to buy into it in a particular way. Because clearly you would know, you could be having a Orlando Carnival, and the rest of the community as normal, they don't know what's going on. They might see two trucks on the road and just say, what's you know. So when you get beyond that boundary and start to get to some of those quote unquote white folks or the residents and explain to them what is happening. And then what we did, we created a little space for them to say, well, there's a Latin community. I remember in Miami long time at Himalaya, we used to keep the carnival around there. We tell the Latin people, look, bring two floats on the street, it has some. So you get the different elements, and America is a place organized like that, Communities tend to live together. There's Jewish, Spanish, Latin, Haitian. They live in groups, and you show them, hey, you can get involved in this too and make something in there for them. And then that way, the thing could grow beyond just a West Indian thing that, a lot of people may not know what it's about. But those things take time, and it's a method to the madness and take a lot of work. And you have to have people dedicated to doing that. It can't be just a voluntary thing. You have to be there, going to all these community groups, going to their meetings long before, encouraging them and trying to get them organized. Then in America in particular, you get the mayors involved. But once the mayor office is involved, you tend to get support from infrastructure like that. But I just want to say one thing, and I think I will have to speak with our Minister of Tourism here too. Because while countries like Trinidad, they try to promote tourism and they go and do all this stuff, local government, through the office of mayors, is an important avenue to promote tourism in a particular country. Okay, like in Point Fortin, we have an ideal case where you're promoting local cultural tourism there. If you can replicate a Point Fortin in about 3 or 4 of the different areas in Trinidad, a lot of them now are starting their borough celebration. And if about 6 of those can build, I mean, every area have the different flavor. But like Arima, they have the borough celebration, but I used to tell him, they must have a little parang event in that because that is what Arima is known for, And if because when you start to promote tourism at that grassroots level, it has a more direct kind of impact. But the ministry could do what and go to all kind of trade fair and do all kind of promotion. But if once the mayors of these cities, so in America, the mayors run things, and I use it in America as an example, but once the mayor is sold, you can get that mayor to tell you, hey, I will send 500 people, 200, a direct thing. He have contact with his local groups. So it has that kind of a direct impact, apart from the high level tourism authority stuff that you would want to. So I think if we use that model, that could impact on islands like Trinidad. So that is something I have to convince the authorities here, and approach we could take to promoting our country.
Yep. So thank you. Do you anything else? That's all the questions that I have for you. But
well, no,
I'll leave it open for you.
I would just want to thank you for the opportunity to chat and converse. I mean, this is something I'm very passionate about, and I certainly think that it's something I want to probably share my knowledge, experience with other areas in other countries, and because I really believe culture, sports, and culture is the way, especially now, to get at young people. But that is an industry where, even within the soca industry, a lot of the younger folks are attracted to that. You can now make a living out of this if you organize your life properly. So I think, but you need the authorities need to understand it and to support it and to share that vision. And what is unique to your community, you need to preserve that. If your community is good in cooking bush wild meat or bushfire and a stone by the river, those elements and the things, those are some of the things that people come to your country for now. Now, the sand and sea and the beach is one thing, but tourists now post are attracted for experiences, you know? So we could sell that kind of community experience in terms of a celebration. And let me thank you for giving me the opportunity, and hopefully we'll reach a wider audience with this communication, and we'll have a follow-up which may indicate how many people would have been impacted, would have come for next year's celebration. So thank you very much.
And I want to thank you for your time. And in terms of like communication, I must say that your alderman, Kobe, I forgot his last name. I follow him on
Sandy, I think.
Sandy, right? So I follow him on Instagram, and it was through him I learned about the extra stuff like that was happening the weeks before, because he was posting every night. So I think he's doing an excellent job in terms of like getting with the little audience he has, getting Point Fortin out on the map there. So
well, he's one of the, I can see, with the new generation, because he's a very vibrant young man. I think he also works with the Ministry of Youth Affairs, so that I would congratulate him for using social media. But I'll need to talk to some of the young ones like Kobe and them, get them a little deeper understanding in some of the things we spoke about. But he's a very active fellow, and he's doing his bit out. Yeah, so I would acknowledge. Okay, thank you.
So I look forward to better things next year and the year after for Point. I hope they can deal with the influx of people that is coming in. And yes, next year we'll see each other again. So thank you. Thank you.
What's your YouTube channel name?
I Am Living My Life.
I Am Living My Life. Kind of long though, but okay.
Yes, it is.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Bertrand. You have a good evening.
Yeah.
And thank you for all the viewers who joined. I hope this was enlightening. I hope you learned a little bit more about Point Fortin Borough and the history behind the celebration. And I hope that if you haven't taken part in the festivities before, hopefully this inspires you to take part in it next year. Okay? Thanks again.
Thank you very much.
Okay then. Bye.